About a year in, he invited me to breakfast and said, it's time you move on to something else. Wow. And there was a little bit of a, hostile takeover at that point. So wow. We got asked to go to the Golden Globes. I put on a tux and, walked the red carpet. And
from side project
yeah,
to the red
it
carpet.
Was still a side
That's
project.
awesome.
I took a day off work and went, to LA. Dad, I'm going to pay you back. Like, I will pay you back. He made a comment to me. He said, you will never pay me back in a timeline that it'll matter in my life. And the world stopped. Twitter sends us in to meet with MTV.
Okay.
Wildest dreams, what do we want out of this? For a SaaS software at this level, we should be able to get $100,000 a year. 30 minutes into the meeting, he's like, how much is it going to cost us? And I said, $100,000 a year. He said, send me a contract, we'll get it done this week. And I immediately, A, knew it was way too cheap.
Yeah.
And B, knew, okay, we got something.
Austin has been referred to as Silicon Hills since the 90s, so we thought it only made sense to sit down with somebody from this space for one of our first stories. Today, we're having a conversation with Barry Cox, who, let down by what his computer science degree could, or rather could not, offer him, left college to start his very own business. Since that day, the only thing more impressive than his prolific career is his first-class character and values. I think you're really going to enjoy today's conversation as we travel all of the way from Eagle Pass, Texas to the Golden Globes and discover life lessons from both failures and successes in between. 6th Street in Congress. I'm excited as you get into your story, significant places all around us.
Yes, it's an awesome venue too.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? It's a cool industrial vibe. And the city, I feel like every week I'm down here, it changes.
It's growing.
Always looks different.
Most of my story that we'll talk about down here, it was radically different downtown.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I think to start, we can kick off just right at the beginning. I'm curious as to whether entrepreneurs are born or made or both, and so maybe we can glean something from early days. So who is young child Barry? Where did you come from?
Yes.
Your family origins, what did that look like?
Yeah, so I was born in Eagle Pass on the border with Mexico, and it's a tiny town now. It was a tiny town then.
Yeah.
And I actually haven't been back as an adult since we left. We were there for I think about 9 months. My brother's 4 years younger than I am, and he was born in Pampa, which is up outside of Amarillo. So the exact opposite end of the state. And my dad was managing a hospital there, and so that was kind of our early life. And actually, not long after that, he got out of healthcare management temporarily, and we moved to Austin. My dad's family was here.
So what was your relationship like, or how did it evolve with mom and dad growing up?
My parents divorced when they separated when I was about 8 and divorced when I was about 10 and a half. Yeah. And it was a pretty, explosive breakup. My mom showed up at the YMCA one day and was like, the car's packed and we're leaving. And we moved to Lubbock, which is where my mom's parents were. And my mom and dad tried to work it out for a little bit. And my dad came out to Lubbock for about 6 months, and then it just, it didn't work, and they got divorced. And we ultimately settled in there. So.
Okay. So did you stay with your mom long term then, or how did that?
No, I was the, classic strong-willed firstborn child, and definitely felt like I needed I wanted my father, and so at age 12 a kid, it's either 12, I think it's 12, a kid can elect hey, I'd prefer to live with this parent. And then at 14, I think they can actually pull the lever, and as a kid, you could force the issue, or at least that's the way I understood it. So at 12, I told my mom, hey, I want to go live with my dad. And so I 7th grade basically, I was 12, moved in with him. I was one part nerd, one part jock in high school, pretty equal balance. And so, I was definitely into a ton of tech stuff, but, was also pretty typical jock. And so there was this performance drive in my household. My dad showed up to sporting events. He didn't show up to a lot of other things. I worked for him in high school, stuffing statements, doing data entry, keeping his network up and running, building PCs back in the day.
Wow. This was all in high school?
That was all in high school, yeah.
How did you learn to know YouTube yet, right?
No YouTube, yeah, man. I can't imagine growing up and having everything at your fingertips in terms of video.
Right.
I was, so my wife Amber and I, we started dating in high school, and she would tell you, dates in high school, consisted of us going out to eat and then going to Barnes and Noble because I was going to buy another technology book. It's awesome. Like everything was like book driven. And I have friends that still clown about, in high school I'd be walking down, down the hall with a 3-inch Java 1 book or TCP/IP network theory book, whatever. And so
I love the football player programmer image.
Yes. I was both my senior year I was both a coach's aide and the computer science teacher's aide. Like it was like
that common.
No, maybe now it wasn't then. And so this computer company offered me a job, and I started working for them, and it was picking up more and more time. And by the time my senior year, second semester of my senior year rolled around, I basically had, once football was over, I had like 3 classes I needed. Right. And the school I was at allowed early release, and so I was like rolling into school at 8:30, rolling out by like 11:15, 11:30, and just heading into work. And so things at this point were starting to deteriorate in relationship with my dad, and so I just pulled the ripcord. And so I'm a March birthday, so my 18th birthday rolled around, and I said, hey, I'm gonna go get an apartment. Yeah. And I was, it doesn't. I was probably making like 38 grand.
I was going to say, a lot of teenagers threaten that, but don't have the means to actually
it was crazy.
Pull it off. So
yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it was like wild times. A lot of early tech stuff felt, look back on it now, it felt like the Wild West. We were putting PCs in doctors' offices where we'd go in and do a little 3 or 4 computer network, and they would pay thousands of dollars, for this little high school kid to roll in and make their computers talk to each other is what they felt like, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So
well, what's next then? If you're already making a lot of money, college is coming. Do you how do you make that decision?
Yeah, it was interesting. So this was one of the breakdowns with my dad. Is he wouldn't give me any advice, and it was and I confronted him on it a couple of them. Like, hey, Dad, should I go to school? What should I do? And he basically told me, whatever answer I give you, you're going to resent me for it later. And so, I'm just not going to weigh in. Mm-hmm. And I even remember as an 18-year-old, it just felt like such a cop-out. It's
you probably end up resenting that answer more than anything else, right?
Yeah. It's like, because of that, I applied to, one school. I applied to Texas Tech, had about 3/4 paid academic scholarship. Anyway, never did it. As I started registering for classes and stuff, the stuff that was going to be taught in computer science in 98 to 02 at Texas Tech was just it was behind stuff I had been doing in high school. Yeah, because I had been pushing the envelope, and Java had just come out and all this stuff, and I'd learned Java in high school as the teacher's aide for the computer science teacher. He's teaching me on the side. Yeah. And so to go to learn Fortran or Pascal or something in college just felt like, man, I'm not gonna waste my time with this. And so
did it take off right away for you, or what is that?
No, well, so my wife transferred to Tech. Yeah. She went for a semester. Yeah. And I was there basically a year, and had a little bit of success, no idea what I was doing, had not run a business, but was brash and confident and almost got there. It wasn't enough to be sustaining. And so about a year in, decided hey, this isn't going to be enough. If I'm getting married and starting a life, this isn't going to get us through. So, shut it down and came back. We actually got married in June. Okay. Went on our honeymoon, came back, moved to Austin. Okay. And I started a job here in Austin kind of immediately after.
And that was more of a stability decision for you at that point? Or?
Yeah, my uncle had a company here in town that provided all the labels to Dell. He provided a bunch of labels to IBM for their computers. He had contracts with NASA and Honeywell. And so this was 1999. Y2K was about to hit. Yeah. And everybody was concerned that the world was going to stop functioning, when the year 2000 rolled around. And I like to tell people the software that was running this little business was probably the only thing that died at Y2K. It was a piece of homegrown software that my uncle had written in like the late 80s in some obscure language that he had learned in an MIS program.
Right.
And anyway, it actually did die.
It really did.
Yeah, so they hired me to come like make some tweaks
That's
so
awesome.
that it would like come in. And so I did. I worked there for about 9 months. So.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being a kid and people panicking and stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But anyway, the world did not stop.
Yeah.
in 2000. So
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Did that first role though, did it scratch that, entrepreneurial itch for you, or were you a little like dissatisfied knowing this is the long-term thing?
It was a job. And it was interesting because I was working for my uncle, and it was definitely a great opportunity, and it was like paying the bills, and I was super grateful to have a place to land, but it wasn't scratching the itch.
Yeah.
And if anything, it was making me hungrier because my uncle was a successful entrepreneur, and he was living that life, and I was just kind of keeping the software running behind it, and so it pushed me a little bit.
So do you feel like it sparked like either like a curiosity, or maybe like, you're not afraid to try things? I feel like plenty of people have ideas but don't like act on them, that little extra.
Definitely. I am missing the filter that says that's going to be really hard to do.
Okay.
Or, man, I don't think I could do that. Like that's like definitely, and I think partially because I just grew up around, a family of entrepreneurs that desensitized, me to, hey, this could be hard, this could fail, this may not be possible.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely the guy that's like, oh yeah, we can figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So how did you know then when it was like time to make the next step?
This is when the tech world in Austin started to heat up, and I started getting approached by recruiters. And a recruiter called me up, interviewed for a job, and it was like nearly double what I was making, in one like job leap.
Yeah.
Looking back, it was probably the worst one I've ever picked, but the money was attractive, and so I jumped and moved to that, and it didn't last long. I was there, I feel like 5 months after I got there, it ran out of money and shut down.
Okay.
And I don't even remember the name of it. And so got picked up by another recruiter and went to a company called Core Metrics.
Okay.
Which for like early tech people, think Google Analytics, pre-Google Analytics.
Okay. So are you doing more like programming there, management there, both? Are you
implementation? So it was like, at this point, it was like, hey, we need somebody that can come in and go to customer sites and actually implement in their website, because it wasn't what Google is now. Hey, put this one line in your site and it just works everywhere. It's not, it was like, but it was cool. I was 20. I was managing clients in the Northeast for this company. I was traveling to New York all the time, in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, working on, Columbia House Video, Ann Taylor, Dun & Bradstreet, a ton of big companies that were implementing this tech.
Can't even rent a car, but I
could not rent a car, which I ran into multiple times. If you're flying in, having a couple meetings in New York, and then trying to get to a meting in New Jersey outside the city, and you don't have I just had to take a town car everywhere I went. It was like I couldn't rent a car.
So it sounds like a cool setup. What was kind of
the cost to move on from there? It was good. As 01 rolled around and the tech world is about to hit its first big tech bubble, they burned through a bunch of money, shrunk the company down. At its peak, it was like 150. I feel like we shrunk down to about 30.
Wow.
And I was there until like the cut from 45 to 30.
Okay.
And pulled the ripcord and was gone. And then from there, jumped in with another Austin Ventures company. That was a tech company, more direct coding, engineering, but it was also kind of this implementation. Hey, they had some software, it was doing network change management software, and we need to like adapt it to different network devices, kind of like device drivers. It was a good gig. Did it for a while. Actually met a gentleman named James Dollar that he also worked there and was a network guy, network admin, was also working on these device drivers. We became fast friends, and we were traveling together, helping this company try to get their software implemented into some really big Fortune 500s that were very interested. But we were spending a month on site at a time, trying to overcome just early stage product challenges. I had my first kind of, or not really my first, my second, I'm going to go do this on my own epiphany. And I just said, hey, part of the challenge here is we're trying to manage a network over the network. And so me and this guy, James, that I'd been traveling with, we said, hey, let's create something where we can manage the network outside the network. Let's build something out of band. And we did. We started a company called Uplogix, still around today, raised venture, built product, had a great run. But that was like the genesis of that moment. We were like sitting there for a month going like, dang, how do we, overcome this stuff? So.
Wow. So since college, this is your first time going into like a true, I'm going to go start something.
Yeah, and I was the boss. So it was really the first time. I'd had the little computer company in Lubbock, but it was like, no venture, not really any employees. It was like, what can I make out of it? And this was, definitely the first time of like, we've raised money. There's outside expectations. I've got expectations. We've got staff. I'm trying to lead, and I'm a baby-faced kid at 22.
Yeah, and so if it's still around today, then what was your journey with?
Yeah, so for about 4 years, raised a couple rounds of funding, traveled all over, sold the product, went well. Citibank was an early customer and became an investor. We grew it for about 4 years and got, over 7 figures in revenue, and, felt like it was going pretty good. And, I think the board and the investors had a sense of, okay, this might go somewhere. And here we have this 24-year-old kid that, hasn't done this before. Let's get him some help. And so they approached me with a guy and they said, hey, this guy's further down the road. He was available. And they're like, hey, why don't we like pair you guys up for a little bit? So it was kind of pitched as like a 2-in-the-box thing. Like, hey, you guys are going to work together in this kind of dual CEO role. And we did for a while. And, he definitely had more experience, had good ideas. So there was some, headbutting along the way as, that founding product visionary role typically, has a different level of passion for what we do and what we say no to, those kind of things. But about a year in, he invited me to breakfast and said, hey, met with the board and, it's time you move on to something else. Wow. And there was a little bit of a, hostile takeover at that point. And so, it was rough. Felt like I had built what we had by hand. I felt like somebody was taking it away from me. I had identity tied up in it and, self-worth tied up in it. And
this is your baby, this is your first startup, first successful. And what was that season like for you? Like even weeks, months after that? Is that like, is it a grieving, a mourning, an anger, all the above? Like what?
All the above, yeah. I think, it's loss. You feel loss and, hurt, and you're second guessing and what could I have done? And I had basically recruited everybody, in the company. And so, I was hearing back channel, some versions of stories that, weren't accurate and, felt like, a little bit of a character attack on me. So I'm dealing with how that felt and processing, that. And, I'm also like looking back going, man, what did I do wrong? Where did I mess this up? And I, fortunately was self-aware to know like, enough to know like I, certainly wasn't perfect and look back and immediately saw, 27 things I felt like I could have done better, and ultimately learned some really good lessons just over a course of a few months, and self-reflection and grieving and dealing with the anger and figuring out what was going to be next, and learn to value people a lot more. Up until that point it was like transactional. It was like, hey, if I just pull a set of people together and drive them like we're on a dog sled, we're going to go do some crazy thing over the hill that's going to be really exciting. And, I didn't see the people. Right. I saw the numbers and the product. And as soon as that was taken away from me, what I missed was the people.
Wow.
It was all the relationships.
Yeah.
That was as much what I was grieving as like, hey, I was a part of something.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful.
I came out of that and like went on a totally different management path.
Wow.
Like tried to really start digging in on like, what's it like to build healthy relationships? What's it really look like to motivate people? What is, motivation's different for different types of people. What's the right way to communicate with people? I learned a ton about organizational goal alignment, you know, and especially in startups, if you don't have a goal alignment from investor to the board to a leadership team down to employees, like if that's fractured anywhere along the way, there's just so much sideways energy and such a greater chance that things are going to fail. Yeah. Because you just don't have, and then in organizations where you see that alignment, it's like somebody's, added super fuel to it, and so learned genesis for learning almost all those lessons was like right in that moment.
Well, and I feel like there's like life lessons in there that are even bigger than just business strategy. I mean, what you just talked about, relationships being more significant than whatever success or failure you might be going through. It even sounds like, you're talking about like what feels like to me empathy, or like stepping into somebody else's world, understanding like how people tick, or listening to them, like crossing that bridge. Those feel transcendent in a way that is huge.
Absolutely.
So you have a huge collection of life lessons here from this painful season, and you said it changed the trajectory of your management leadership going forward. So where did you take that next?
Yeah, so I worked for a couple other tech companies here in town. From Uplogix, I went to a company called People Admin, which makes HR software for higher ed, and they had a partial rewrite, which anybody in tech will tell you is like crazy complex for more reasons than we have time to talk about. But I said, yep, okay, I'll do that and take that on. And I started pursuing people differently, started recruiting engineers differently, and this little boring HR software company, we look up in a couple of years and we have arguably one of the best engineering teams in Austin at the time. Okay. And it was guys that I had kind of recruited unconventionally by building relationship and spending time with. There was like a Tuesday night coding group that would, gather in a bar or coffee shop and work on side projects. And I started investing time in that, getting to know these guys, what made them tick, and, gradually just kind of collected this group of guys. And we had this like amazing engineering team working for this little HR company. And awesome. And it was great. And, what's really cool is 3 of us, 2 guys and myself, were working on a side project as we worked for People Admin. And we built a Twitter curation tool called Tweet River. Yeah. And this is very early into social media being around. And we had actually seen Zappos at the time, had a list of tweets on the Zappos website. This is pre-Amazon buying Zappos. Okay. And it was basically Zappos employees, what they were tweeting. We thought, man, there's a product idea. Like, let's give a business the ability to say, I want to like aggregate or curate this set of users or tweets or hashtags and embed them in a website. Yeah. And so we set about building this little tool. Again, total side project. We actually didn't really have commercial intentions. It's just like, this is a cool problem. Let's go solve this. Right. And so we did, and we, had a few little companies using it, and somewhere it got like the attention of Twitter, and so one day we get a call from NBC, and they say, hey, we're building this like dual screen experience, and we would like to include tweets on Sunday Night Football. We have this like second screen experience for Sunday Night Football, and we want to include tweets about the game in this player we've built. Can your software do this? Yeah. And we said, we can do it. And there were some things we needed to do, but we, made it work. And anyway, they're like, well, how much would this cost? And, I forget the exact number, but like it was on order of like $2,000. Yeah. And they're like, okay, we'll take it. And at the time, a lot of people were like, as we're talking to people about what we built, they're like, nobody pays for social media. Yeah. Oh, that's totally free. Like, there's no commerce in that. Like, and so these guys are going to pay us $2,000. This sounds fantastic. Yeah. And so, we're in that season, Sunday Night Football, made $2,000. Again, we still all have day jobs. This is just a little side thing. Yeah. Well, of course, Twitter finds out about it. They're pretty excited about it. And about 3 weeks later, we get a call from ABC. And they say, hey, we'd really like to embed tweets on abc.com for the Dancing with the Stars season. Can we, do you think this technology could like start to curate like people that are on Dancing with the Stars tweeting about like their experience? Can we stick these on the ABC homepage or subpage? And we're like, oh yeah, we can do it. They're like, great. How much does this cost? We're like, $5,000 or whatever it was, Yeah. They're like, no problem. And so, at this point, Twitter is like this is like fail whale days of Twitter, like early days where Twitter's crashing all the time. Okay. And so they're trying to push out into the mainstream. They're pretty excited too. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden it's like, they're starting to feed us media companies that are like, hey, we're interested, and we went on a really crazy ride. Yeah, it was for the 2008 election, I was in New York, sitting in the newsroom of the New York Times, installing our widget to curate tweets about the election as Obama's election night is happening. Nice. And I'm literally on the the floor of the newsroom, and got there the day before, got it in. I'm sitting there. The two guys that I'm working with are back home, like trying to keep all the, wheels running so that it doesn't fall over on the homepage of the New York Times. And so, we did that. And shortly after that, we got asked to go to the Golden Globes. So the Golden Globes wanted to, they basically, so after somebody wins, they go into the back room and they are in front of a press panel, and the press pepper them with, hey, how's it feel to win? Or what do you think about this? And so there's kind of this progression where they're on stage, they kind of work their way, or they'd work their way through this back room where they could do individual press breakouts or something, and then they ended up in a press briefing room where there was a press pool that would interview them. And so the Hollywood Foreign Press, who puts on the Golden Globes, wanted to basically have the first press question that got asked to every winner be a curated question from Twitter. So they can't, so they went to Twitter, and Twitter recommended us. And so, I put on a tux and, walked the red carpet. And
from side project to the red carpet.
It was still a side project.
Awesome,
I took a day off work and went, to LA. And,
Do you remember seeing or meeting any celebrities that night?
I saw all kinds. This was when Glee was in its heyday. It won. Jack Nicholas won something that year for something big. And all these guys I'm 10 feet away from.
That's awesome.
And so the way it worked, and I say this because it was hilarious, because if they would have realized the hamster wheels that were running in the background to prop all this up.
Right.
But basically you had 7 minutes from when the person was on stage accepting their award, so they were going to get to the press pool. And so we're curating, trying to find the right tweet question in that 7 minutes, because the way it worked is they had rigged the press pool room, and the Hollywood Foreign Press reporter always got to ask the first question. And we were curating that question and turning and giving it to the reporter so that the reporter could ask whoever won. Well, the problem, social media today is not great. Social media 10 years ago, it was not, it was rough.
Right.
And so there was a lot of noise.
You're talking about the content coming through, right?
A lot of noise coming through, ask Jack Nicholson something wildly inappropriate, And so we're radically trying to curate out hey, let's find a good one. And I, at least half a dozen times, we'd get down to 4, okay, these are the best 4 we have for this particular. And it doesn't matter if we have a good one, we're trying to come up with a good one.
Right.
Because no matter what, they're going to ask this reporter first, and her question's supposed to come from us. And at least 6 times she goes, I'm not going to ask them that. And it's just very proper.
So it's like
formal.
A stressful night for you guys.
Oh man,
you're not enjoying it.
It was it was rough. But it got us noticed, and Twitter took notice and almost had an acquire hire of us. They were interested. They ended up. This became a company that a lot of people in Austin will know now. So Twitter sends us in to meet with MTV.
Okay.
And MTV had just done the VMAs and incorporated tweets in the stage of the VMA for the first, it was the first big media mashup with social media, and they had gotten a lot of praise for it. So they hook us up to go meet with MTV. And so I take a Friday off work, Thursday night fly to New York. But before, I had met with some advisors. I had met with my, what are we gonna charge them? Because now we think we got something. And we'd charged nothing for the last couple, and anyway, we'd gotten together, man, and so many advisors and VCs had said, hey, this is a product, it's not a company. There's not, and so I'm well, we're going to meet with the head of digital for MTV, Viacom. Let's go figure this out. And so we said, well, wildest dreams, what do we want out of this? We said, well, if there's a company here for a SaaS software at this level, we should be able to get $100,000 a year as a subscription. So anyway, have a great meeting with this guy, demo our product, 30 minutes into the meeting, he's like, how much is it going to cost us? And I said, $100,0and a year. He said, send me a contract, we'll get it done this week. And I immediately, knew it was way too cheap. And B, knew, okay, we got something. anyway, so yeah, we ended up doing a deal with all of Icom and their brands, and came back, used that as a catalyst to raise venture capital for that company. And that company was called Tweet River. It became a company called Mass Relevance.
Okay.
Which later merged with a company called Spreadfast. And, that was kind of the end of my run there. I got pulled back into people admin because as I mentioned, we were in the middle of a rewrite, and it just wasn't a good time for me to leave and go run that. But my two business partners went with Mass Relevance, and a gentleman named Sam Decker, who's an amazing marketer and entrepreneur here in town. The three of them kind of took that genesis of Tweet River and, it turned into Mass Relevance, and those guys went out and crushed it and did all, that company went on and did media for the Olympics, for March Madness, for the Super Bowl, for all kinds of things that mashed up social media and mainstream media. It was really cool. So they killed it.
I love for me, the connection of one of the cooler stories of your career, shortly after learning this lesson of investing in the people and the relationships around you, and you have this connection to some great guys, some great minds, and you get to tell the story you just told now. I don't know if you would have that otherwise, if not for a painful season, right?
Absolutely. And those are still, two just amazing guys that, have, love those relationships, love those guys. And
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to finish with maybe just some observations, life lessons from some of these kind of successes, failures. So maybe almost more for sake of time, if you were to give just kind of a quick synopsis from there, business career, even to today, some of the projects, so on, highlights you've been a part of.
Yeah, so the highlights were there. I was fortunate. Those companies merged and sold. Now for me, it's way more about, investing in the next generation. I work with some incredible, young people that are, coming up early in their career, that are humble and hungry and, really smart. And, so a lot of it for me now is just getting the opportunity to work alongside these folks. I tell people, really frequently if asked, is, value the people, the relationships matter more than anything. I think a lot of people, there's been an awakening in the last decade, especially with tech companies, that people realize the company's greatest capital, its greatest assets are its people. I think that was, a huge set of lessons learned for me. I learned as an entrepreneur and a father some important lessons early on. I had a really good friend of mine sit me down post people admin as I was into the next startup and thinking about another startup, and I had 3 young kids at home, and he's like, for the next 10 years your kids need you, and you can start another business 10 years from now. You don't get these next 10 years with your kids back.
Wow.
And you're going to wake up at some point and realize you're operating at 25 or 30% influence in their life when you have an impact now at 80% influence in their life. What can you do with this time with them? And it spoke to me, it shook me. I was like, yeah, and I put off some things and said, you're right. I can start another company at 45, but I don't get to go back and be a dad to, my kids when they're 5, 7 and 9. And that was one of those things that kind of changed my life, gave me a different perspective, gave me I was hustling, grinding to, still, prove I was worth it to my dad, and all the things that so I hit a moment. I'll share one more, and I hit a moment with my dad. I definitely classic father wound, and as I was wrapping up that first business, I actually borrowed some money from my dad. I was trying to wind down the business and needed to pay some stuff so that I could close down the business effectively. And anyway, my dad loaned me $20,000 or something. And he didn't tell my stepmom, and he had it, and it wasn't a big stretch for him, and he did. And a few years later, I'm at that company's closed, and I'm at a different startup, and it's one of those things that sticks with you when I can tell you I know exactly where I was at. I know which way the sun was coming from.
Wow.
It was that
Time,
moment's frozen.
still, yeah.
I'm on the phone with my dad a couple years after that point, and my stepmother has figured out he's given me this money, and she's on his case to get it back. And so he's called me in the middle of the workday to not so much ask for the money back, but to just complain that he's sort of been caught in giving it to me without telling my stepmother, and kind of just make me feel bad as how I took it. And I'm definitely feeling bad. I've closed that company down. I haven't been able to repay him, and I'm feeling the guilt of that. And I basically, towards the back half of the conversation, I'm saying like, Dad, I'm gonna pay you back. Like, I will pay you back. Like, And he made a comment to me. He said, "You will never pay me back in a timeline that it'll matter in my life." And like the world stopped. It crushed me.
Yeah.
And some of my chasing between that point and the point that Uplogix got taken away from me, like the drive I had in there was trying to prove him wrong.
Right.
And trying to prove to myself that I was enough, and trying to accumulate enough resources to not only pay him back, but to demonstrate like I'm good enough. I'm better than you.
Wow.
Anyway, so those were also, big things I had to learn. And I think, a lot of us carry those kind of wounds of, we've got a hurt. We've got, moments with our parents where they, mark us in ways they don't realize they mark us. And then we live entire seasons in our life driven and motivated by that, only to later realize like, wait, I gave the reins of my life to somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's been driving me in this like crazy, unhealthy way,
Yeah.
Anyway, I did get to repay my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was one of those low-key, like super satisfying moments in your life. He later in his life was at a point where he needed the money, and he asked me for it.
Yeah.
And it was snarky, but one of the, I said to him, I said, "How much interest would you like?"
Wow.
I had long since forgiven him and moved past, but there was this like nice little closure of like, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, took care of that.
Wow.
So anyway.
Well, whether it's from, dad or mom, unfortunately, there's a whole lot of people listening to it that could relate with not the exact same scenario, but
Sure.
something in those lines, and it's powerful. I'm curious with that, and maybe we just close on this. If you had the recognition that either consciously or subconsciously drove you for a long time, maybe decades of your life. Today, you're still a very hardworking, driven, disciplined individual. What has shifted, or what would you say today is the leading thing or leading couple things that inspires you to live for something bigger than you?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, love. That I'm in a position to mentor, work with, up and coming entrepreneurs, and that's a big motivation for me. In some point you start to like, I'm living a little bit for my legacy and my with my kids and my family and my extended family, and then I think there's just I've been blessed. I've had some positive outcomes, and it's just like there's so many opportunities to just have an impact, in this world. And we need, people that have, experienced the up and downs of life and, found little wins along the way, to not hoard those wins personally, but to turn around and say like, how can I help my neighbor? How can I help my community? How can I, plug into my church? How can I, there's just so many opportunities to take those wins and those lessons and say like, I want to turn those outward.
Wow. Well, man, whether it's, relationships, dealing with the setbacks and the pains of our life, if it's business and leadership, there's so much throughout what you just shared that is helpful in so many ways to a lot of people. So I really appreciate
thank you
your
for
time, sharing, trusting your story with us.
Yeah.
I'm super grateful for you, man. So